This is Jay with New England on the Rails, and today I'm going to talk about part 2 of modeling realistic track on your train layout. So I went ahead and removed all of my son's HO locomotives and rolling stock from these 4 tracks in the train yard that I am going to ballast. And you'll see also at the end, so underneath these piles of ballast on the end of each track is the wiring for each one of these tracks. So I've hidden that with that, but let's go over how to ballast the tracks, and I'll do these 4 rails up to the point of the switches so you guys can get an idea how to model realistic track. Now this is code 83 track, so keep that in mind. This is the most realistic HO track that is available out there for model railroaders doing HO scale track. And again, I've said it in a previous video, so Pico makes code 83 track, but Atlas code 83 track looks the most realistic with the tie spacing and everything like that. So that's what I went with on this layout. And let's get into how to ballast this. So one of the first things I'm going to do is tape off the middle hole on this 3D printed ballast thing, because I'm going to use a spoon to put it in the middle of the tracks, and I'll show you guys how I do that and why I do that. But again, I like to tape off that middle hole because I think it tends to put too much ballast in the center of the tracks near the ties and just creates a nightmare for cleaning everything up. So we're gonna place this where we need. And at that point, I'm going to use some Woodland Scenics ballast, fill this up, and then run it along the tracks. And then at that point, I'll do it for each consecutive rail. Make sure that nothing gross is showing, and then I'll show you guys the following steps. So now that we know all 4 tracks are working and wired, we're going to take this Woodland Scenics fine ballast, which is okay for HO scale, but it's excellent for N scale. We're going to pour that into this. We're going to fill it up. There we go. And we are getting close to a switch, so I don't want to go too far with that. And that's good. Then I can just lift that up. It's okay if you get ballast everywhere. Don't worry about it, because I'm going to show you guys how to deal with that. But now we're going to go on to the second track. So the second track is loaded up, and you want to try to get that as level as possible. And then at this point, just run your ballast along. Keep an eye on that hopper. If it starts getting low, refill it. Stop where you're at. And we just continue this on the second track, and it's rapidly running out pretty quick. So we're going to need another refill. So we are on track 3 now, and you can see there's a little bit of a gap in between. Don't worry about that at this point. At this point, we are just getting the ballast down. I need to refill it for track 3, so here we go. Let's fill it up. Okay. And we are going to run this down the 3rd line of the track. There we go. Just run it down. Real simple. It's not super complicated. We're getting low. And I don't like when I see these like weird gaps with the roadbed. So what I like to do, fill it up again. Okay. And then we're going to run it down the track again. And just keep running it down. And it's okay If you see the road bed in between, that's fine. Oh, we're getting low again. Let's fill it again. And we're just going to keep doing this. Take our time. It's not a rush. Run it down. And you can see that gap over there. That's fine. We'll just run this back over if we can. Any excess, that's fine too. I'm not worried about it, because there's a lot of different techniques that you can use to fix this. And that's the beauty of model railroading, is even if you make a mistake, you can actually go back and fix things, which is beautiful. So don't worry about this stuff. Just lay it out. Okay. Now we're going to do the fourth rail. So let's get that in place. We'll fill that up and then start that rail. So here is the fourth rail. And we're just running that down, taking our time. Oh, that's fine. Okay. And we can go back and forth a few times if we're not happy with how that looks. That is fine as well. As you can see, I've just fixed all of those sins just by going back and forth a few times. Okay. All right, let's move that lid. Okay. Okay. And we are going to need to add some more ballast to this. All right, so we've added some more ballast to this 3D printed ballast layer. And we're just going to go back and forth. As you can see the technique. Let it build up on the outside rails. There we go. Oh, let's go back. Fix that. And we're just going to keep going back and forth. Okay, we're going to need to add a little bit more ballast because we have about, I'd say about 20 inches of rail to go. And then you can see most of the ballast is laid out here, and not including the center rails. I'll get into that in a minute, but let's finish laying the outside ballast to these tracks. And let's get it to a point where we're at this switch. And then you guys will see how to lay realistic ballast with tracks. So we've laid our ballast, not in the switches, which is fine. There's a little spillover. That's okay too. So at this point, we're just going to use a plastic spoon. And we're going to go over to the middle of the rails, and you're just going to give it a little tap, a little love tap. That's what I like to say, a love tap. And just go along the middle of the rails and just give it just enough to fill in between the rails. Not a lot. And that's why I like to block off the middle of those rail tools, because you just want to give it a little bit, just a little. And we're just going to go along, a little love tap with my finger, just like that. And here's the beauty of this. It's very forgiving. So if you mess up, it's not a big mess up. You know, you might have to do a little bit of cleanup, which I'll talk about, you know, kind of next steps after you do this, but it's not that bad. Just enough to cover between the rails. Be very careful near your switches, obviously, because there's contact points, you know, between those. But we're just going to go between the rails with just enough to sprinkle in. And you can see the adhesive I've used blends right in as well, because I went with a gray adhesive. So the gray ballast looks just fine in here. There's no problem with that at all. And we're just going to fill in between the ties. And it's okay if you use a little bit too much, not a big deal. Because you're going to go back and clean this up anyways before you get to the next step. So, you know, you can just continue to sprinkle that in and make it look just right. One thing you're going to want to do is go between your track. And again, just be very careful, very light amount, and fill it in with ballast, just like that. Not a big deal, real simple. Don't use much. Make sure that you have enough ballast to do this. And, you know, just sprinkle in just enough to fill in those voids between the tracks. So it looks like real ballast. And we're going to have a third step of this video to show you guys, you know, how to make it look ultra realistic. And there you go. Those two tracks tied together pretty well. We're going to go along again, and we're going to go and fill in that void between these tracks. And you want it to have some dimension to it, so don't use too much. You want it to sink in a little bit between the tracks. That way it looks like realistic rails. Okay. And here we go again. And just sprinkling in the minimal amount to just cover that roadbed. There we go. Looks good. So all of the track has been ballast, and you will see I have a brush, and what we're going to do is just gently work this brush over each tie to basically clean it up. You know, it's a learned technique. So we're going to do the center of the rail because that's the most important part. If you get a lot of static cling, because a lot of this ballast is just ground up walnut shells, you're going to want to use a basically an anti-static sheet from your dryer and just wipe the end of the brush at that point. And we're going to just go down each rail, do the center, and then you can go back and do the sides. So what I like to do to make the rails look more realistic is sweep the sides, just like that. So you're going to see the ties. And that's fine. That looks great. So we're going to do that for all the track leading down, starting with the centers, and then do each side to make the rails look realistic. So at this point, you should end up with something like this. The first 3 rails have been done. Then you can just rub your fingers over it to clean it up a little bit. And now we're going to do the 4th and final rail, and then we will move on to the next steps. One thing that I wanted to mention is, even if you put down too much ballast and it gets clogged up and everything, you can go back with a fine set of tweezers, angled tweezers, and just clean out the rails so everything runs smooth. So I recommend doing small parts of your layout at once it's been tested to run as far as the wiring, and then at that point make sure everything runs smooth. And if you find any rough spots, go back and just clean out the rails, get out the excess ballast, and then at that point everything should run great. So we are going to get these 4 tracks all set tonight with ballast, and we will take it from there. So now all the ballast has been laid down, and I've ran my finger along all of the track to make sure it's as smooth as possible. Tried not to put too much in the switches, so those all run good. And we're just running my finger along there to make sure that it's clean as possible. And now at this point, we can move on to the next step, which is to spray this with a bottle of rubbing alcohol. And what this does is it breaks down the surface tension of the ballast. That way, when you glue it, it's not a problem. But what I like to do is I like to mist it from a distance because it has a tendency to want to clump. So we are just being as careful as possible, wetting that down. And I like to work within like a 2-foot section at a time. So that is now all done with the rubbing alcohol. Okay. So now that that is all wet, we're going to use Woodland Scenic's Scenic Cement with a basically a dropper. Squeeze that, and you're going to get your glue, and I'll show you how to apply that. So with the Scenic Cement, I got my dropper full. First, just start between the ties, and you're going to notice that it just immediately almost disappears. Some might float up a little bit, not a big deal, but the rest of it will sink, and you're going to do that on all your tracks. And then once you do the centers, do the outside edges, and then at that point, you'll be complete. This may take some time for this to absorb into it, but it will. And it'll dry clear to a matte finish, so it'll look very realistic. All right, so we've been laying our Scenic Cement, and I'm just going to keep filling up, and just make sure that when you run it, just drop it in there. If it piles up at the surface, you don't have enough alcohol to break the surface tension. And you can just keep going back and forth. So the ballast has been laid down, and at this point, we're going to let it dry for at least 48 hours to harden up. And then at that point, we can go back and clean the tracks with a Bright Boy to make sure everything's running right. We're going to run cars on it. If anything gets hung up on it, we're going to clean out the little bits of ballast between the rails. And then at that point, we'll just test out the trains, make sure everything's running right. But that's how you make realistic track in HO code 83 scale, or even N scale code 55 track. Those are the two most realistic tracks available out there for model railroaders. So that's part 2 of how you model realistic track on your HO or N scale train layout using fine ballast. This is still wet. It's been 24 hours. Most of it in the front is dry. The back part, I wouldn't touch that. I'd let that sit for at least 48 hours before you start putting things back, things like that. But there's actually going to be a part 3 where we're going to make this ballast look a little bit aged. And I'll show you guys how to do that in the next video. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give the video a like. If you have questions or comments, be sure to comment down below. If you're not subscribed to our channel, be sure to subscribe, because I'm going to share a lot of info I've learned over the years from my father, and just different techniques and things like that I've done with model railroading. So again, thank you very much for watching, guys. This is Jay with New England on the Rails. Until next time, take care.